I've been making some progress on my Lopi cardigan and wanted to share where I'm at. I did select a pattern to base my project off of. I'm using the anniversary Lopi pattern, which I'll include a link in the description. This is a free pattern by Alafos and the Icelandic Wool Association. I believe was the 20th anniversary pattern for the release of Lopi. So that is a traditionally constructed Icelandic sweater. So sleeves from the bottom up on both sides, then you knit the body and then the yoke. So I have done my math that I need to convert this to a pattern for machine knitting. This is basically my cheat sheet for the Lopi that I will be making. I'll be making 2 sleeves and working those flat. The back and front will be very similar but not identical because the body front will have a row of stitches for steeking at a later time. I've tested my gauges, I have played around with my machine and done a little bit of practice, and I have even knit my very first sleeve. So this is my sleeve. It is currently on barber cord. If you're not familiar with them, they've been around for forever, but barber cords are relatively new to the knitting world. At least I've only heard about them in the last couple of years. And they are just a flexible tube that I actually bought like 50 feet of it on Amazon for like $12. But you can buy them individually at a lot of specialty knitting stores. And it's just a really nice way to put your work on hold. So my sleeve is on hold and you can actually see my color work. I'm pretty happy with my color work and how it is going. I have the floats on the back. The floats are a little bit longer than if I were hand knitting. I have a pretty good way of pulling my floats tight. And I was not able to replicate that with the machine. But I have one sleeve done. So tonight I'm going to be working on my second sleeve and hopefully get started on the back of the sweater as well. I took really good notes when I made my first Lopi for myself. So thank you to my previous self for doing that. It's been really helpful here in order to understand what I had previously done and what had been successful for me. I did spend a good bit of time swatching for this project because I wanted to make sure that I was doing everything correctly. So this is the swatch that I wound up with. This was on tension 2 on my machine and I hit gauge perfectly. These swatches have been washed and blocked. This was my first swatch. There are 3 different sizes in here. I started at tension 4, then went up to tension 5 and back down to tension 3. This is very loose. I would potentially use it for something else, but definitely would not use it for this specific project. And this was my first foray into color work on my machine. The color work on the machine is very, very interesting. I have never done color work like this before, but what I think it's really cool is it reminds me a lot of 2-color brioche. So with 2-color brioche, you're constantly moving things back and forth and you're knitting with different, you're knitting the same row multiple times. And that's very similar to what knitting 2-color on a machine is like. Overall, I'm quite happy with how the first sleeve turned out. It only took me like an hour and a half, so we'll see how things progress tonight. I just realized my plan is actually kind of dumb. I can just knit the two halves of the cardigan front as halves and only steek the yoke instead of having to cut all the way through my knitting. That way there will be less likelihood that it will unravel, and knitting on a machine on the full bed is actually a lot harder than knitting on a small section of the bed. So yeah, I need to redo some of my math so that I can actually split the cardigan fronts appropriately, but the back should be the same. Last night I knit the second sleeve and started on the back, but I didn't have enough weight, so I actually dropped an entire row of stitches. So I just gave up and said I would start over today. So that's what I'm working on now. Oh, it keeps happening. Definitely gonna undo this and just try again. Gosh. Well, this has been frustrating. This is the third time that I've dropped all my stitches. So I think I'm gonna give it one more go during the color work, doing the color work for the back of the sweater, which is the longest piece. And if it doesn't work, then I'm just going to do contrast color for the cuff, and then I'll just switch to the gray for the body. And there will only be color work on the sleeves at the edging instead of at the bottom of the sweater, because this yarn can't really be knit that many times, especially not in a machine, because it is a single ply and it's pretty breakable and it's already starting to fall apart where it's eaten all that stress. So, here are my 5 pieces. I have 2 cardigan fronts, 2 sleeves, and the back. Now just time to block. I've now finished the machine knitting part of my Lopi project. I have started blocking it and will hopefully have that dry enough where I can start seaming very shortly. After I seam, then what I'm going to do is I'll knit the yoke, and after I knit the yoke I will steek it. After steeking, I will knit the button band. I have decided to do a more traditional button band as opposed to a zipper. After I do that, I will block it once more, but I think it should be pretty lightly blocked because I'm just going to be blocking to make sure that the yoke sits the same way as the rest of the body of the sweater, and it should be good to go. I'm really pleased with how things worked with the Singer machine that I'm using. So I'm not sure that I actually mentioned this earlier. The machine that I'm using for this project is a Singer SK151. This machine is a little bit, I don't know, more challenging to work with. I actually think it's a little less challenging to work with than the standard gauge machine because it is very, very simple. But part of why it's extremely simple is all of the patterning was done manually. So I had to manually manipulate all of the needles in order to get the colorwork pattern the way that I wanted it to. Now, as a hand knitter, it wasn't that hard for me to adapt to it. I think the hardest thing to understand is that when you're looking at a knitting machine, you're looking at the wrong side of the work. So you're looking at the purl side of the work. And I'm used to looking at the right side of the work, especially during color work. So you actually have to reverse all of the pattern if you want it to be the same. Now this was a reversible pattern, or it was a symmetrical pattern, so it didn't really matter in this case, but that's something I'll need to watch out for in the future. I feel like it gave me a really good understanding of how a knitting machine actually does color work. So I believe the way that I had explained it before was that it's a lot like doing two-color brioche, where you're knitting with one color and then you knit with the other color, and you're not carrying them simultaneously. When you do stranded color work in the round, the way that I do it is I carry both colors at once. So you're slipping the stitches that are in your contrast color when you are knitting with your main color, and then vice versa when you're knitting with your contrast color. It makes a lot of sense if you're a hand knitter and you've done stranded color work before, but if you haven't done stranded color work and this doesn't make a lot of sense to you, sorry. But it does make sense to me in my brain. So basically what the machine is doing is you're knitting with one color, slipping all of the stitches that are not in that color, and then you are knitting that same row again with your contrast color. I did have some frustration with when I was using basically the full bed of needles, and I was knitting 106 stitches out of my 110 stitch bed and trying to do color work with that. I had a lot of problems where I dropped like all of the needles that were supposed to be working instead of actually working, totally dropped off of the needle bed. I think that that was because I wasn't using enough weight. So when I slowed down and hung additional weights right below my working yarn, and I actually like stood up and moved the carriage instead, that was when I was able to actually get through the color work. I did not have those problems when I did the color work on the two halves of the front of the sweater, and I think it's just because all that weight was more concentrated, because I was only doing like 55 stitches. You can expect 2 more parts of this series. You can expect next where I'll talk about seaming up all of the pieces, as well as hand knitting the yoke. Then I'll do one last video on steeking, knitting the button band, and a try-on. Let me know if you like to see content like this, or if there are other pieces of the process that you'd like to see more of.